They said she died quickly. They said it was clean, precise. But the truth is much darker. Because Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, second wife of Henry VIII, didn't just lose her head. She lost everything, dignity, peace, and even her identity, in a death scripted like a public spectacle. Studio microphone, if you think you know the story, you don't subscribe to the channel now. Because the past you've been told is only half the truth. Here, history bleeds. The sun rose slowly over the Tower of London on May 19th, 1536. The sky was clear, birds stirred over the Thames, and the cobblestones still held the cold breath of a night. But inside the tower, everything was still. The servants moved quietly. The guards avoided eye contact. In a chamber deep within the fortress, Anne Boleyn prepared to die. She had barely slept. For 17 days she had waited, alone, imprisoned, betrayed. Her enemies had made a mockery of her trial. The charges? Adultery, incest, treason, lies, all of them. Political tools. The court had smiled as it killed her. The sentence had already been decided before she was even arrested. Anne Boleyn was never going to survive Henry VIII's disappointment. Not after she failed to give him a son. They dressed her in a dark gray gown, trimmed with ermine. Her hood was modest. Her expression was unreadable. Some said she prayed all night. Others said she laughed. One servant claimed she spoke to no one, just stared at the wall, lips moving in silent conversation with God. But when the hour arrived, she stood. No screaming, no weeping, no plea for mercy. The Queen of England walked toward her own death with eyes wide open. But the execution that followed, what they don't tell you, is far more chilling than the clean, elegant stories written in history books. Anne Boleyn was not taken to a scaffold with a single block. She was not met by a silent executioner with a clean blade. What awaited her was theater, a cruel, choreographed display, staged by her husband to break her spirit, even in her final breath. He had ordered a swordsman from France, not out of kindness, but to avoid a traditional axe, a tool too messy, too slow. He wanted it fast, public, inevitable. They led her past the green lawns of the tower, past guards about out of habit, not respect, past the chapel where she once prayed as queen, and then into the open. A raised wooden platform stood waiting, surrounded by a crowd of hundreds, nobles, servants, foreign ambassadors, and commoners too, all gathered to watch a queen die. The scaffold was built low, so every face could see hers. There was no curtain, no barrier, no shield from the eyes of the nation. A priest stood beside her, but his prayers were drowned by the murmurs of the crowd. She knelt on a cushion in the center of the platform. There was no block, no blindfold. She was told not to move, told to keep still as death approached from behind. The swordsman waited quietly. He held no axe, no gleaming weapon in full view. He had hidden his blade in the straw to keep her calm. But that, too, was part of the cruelty. She wouldn't see it coming. He would call for his assistant, and as she instinctively turned her head, he would strike. And yet, in those last moments, Anne Boleyn did not beg. She looked out at the crowd, at the courtiers who had once praised her beauty, now come to measure her suffering. She spoke calmly, her voice cleared. She did not accuse. She did not defend. She spoke of the king, Henry VIII, as a good and gracious lord. The words sounded like surrender, but they weren't. They were a mirror, because only a truly monstrous king could let those words be her last. The crowd fell silent. The wind shifted. The swordsman moved. She never saw the blade, but it was an instant. Witnesses said the sword didn't sever cleanly, that it struck hard against the back of her neck, and for a moment, only a breath, she remained upright, that her body jerked, that the executioner had to finish the cut, that blood spattered against the hay, the wood, the hems of noble gowns, that her eyes blinked once after her head fell, that someone screamed, that the crowd recoiled, and in that moment, history looked away. But we won't, because in this channel, we peel back the veil of myth to show what power really does, what fear really looks like, what it means when a queen becomes a warning. Her body was removed in silence. No coffin, no royal burial procession, just a rough wooden box hastily repurposed from an old arrow chest. Her ladies-in-waiting gathered her remains with trembling hands, wrapping the severed head in linen, cradling it as if she still breathed. They say the ground beneath the scaffold remained stained for days. The tower staff avoided it, even after it had been scrubbed and washed, because something lingered, not just blood, shame. Anne Boleyn had been queen, crowned in majesty, celebrated with processions and pageantry. Now she was dumped into a shallow grave beneath the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, her name scratched into a crude wooden marker. No tomb, no monument, just stone and silence. And within weeks, that silence would deepen, buried under lies. Because Henry VIII didn't mourn. He didn't weep. He didn't retreat in grief. He remarried just 11 days later. 11 days. Jane Seymour, his third wife, stepped into Anne's place before ground above her grave had settled. The court celebrated. The musicians returned. The palace halls filled again with laughter. Anne's name was not spoken, but not because she was forgotten, because everyone remembered, and that memory haunted the walls. Whispers spread through court that Anne's ghost walked the tower, head tucked beneath her arm, searching for the justice she never received, that she appeared to her accusers in dreams, that strange sounds echoed from the chapel at night. Her execution had been public, but what followed was hidden, sanitized, rewritten. Historians would later debate everything, the charges, the evidence, the timing, the role of the king. But what they couldn't debate was this. Anne Boleyn was sacrificed, a scapegoat for a king's ambition, a warning to every woman who dared to rise too high, too fast, with a voice too sharp and a mind too clever. She wasn't just executed, she was erased. Her portraits were destroyed, her family exiled, her name cursed. Even her daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I, was declared illegitimate, yet, and had done nothing that hadn't been permitted. She had followed the rules until she started rewriting them. She spoke her mind, challenged scholars, debated theology. She refused to be silent in a court that demanded quiet queens. She gave birth to a daughter and promised more, but it wasn't enough. And when it wasn't enough, she became disposable. The men who orchestrated her downfall were rewarded. Thomas Cromwell, the architect of her destruction, rose in power. The courtiers who testified against her gained land and favor. The nobles who had cheered her coronation now toasted her death. The system that killed Anne Boleyn thrived because it was designed to. But beneath the surface, cracks formed. The people murmured. Some questioned the verdict. Others feared what it meant, that the queen could be discarded so easily. That truth no longer mattered, that the king's favor was as fleeting as the seasons, and they were right to fear, because after and the executions didn't stop. They continued. Nobles, clergy, artists, friends, even wives. Anne's fate opened a door, and through it poured a rain of terror that would stain the Tudor court for decades. Heads rolled, towers filled, the blade was kept sharp. Because once a king kills a queen, no one is safe. Anne's execution became a template, a warning carved into history. But what made it truly horrifying wasn't just the blood or the blade or the betrayal. It was the precision, the way it was choreographed, engineered, performed. Henry VIII didn't just want Anne dead. He wanted her destroyed. Her death had to be public, swift, unforgettable. He chose the French swordsman not for mercy, but for spectacle. He wanted grace, silence, shock. A queen who had risen like fire, put out with a whisper, but whispers linger, and so did she. Long after her body was buried, and Boleyn's presence never truly left the tower. Servants reported unexplained noises at night. Soft weeping, distant footsteps, the rustle of silk gowns dragging across stone. One guard swore he saw a pale figure gliding along the battlements, hands clasped, eyes vacant, mouth whispering words he couldn't understand. He never returned to that post again. But hauntings aren't always supernatural. Sometimes a ghost is just a memory of injustice too great to forget. Because Anne's execution marked more than the death of a queen. It marked the death of trust. In the months following her beheading, fear spread like rot through the Tudor court. If Anne, the once untouchable queen, could be destroyed by whispers and forged confessions, then no one was safe. Every glance became a threat, every word a possible death sentence. Friends betrayed each other. Families collapsed under suspicion. Henry had proven what kind of king he truly was. And the horror? It worked. The court learned its lesson. They watched what they said. They bowed lower, spoke less. Anne's execution didn't just silence her, it silenced everyone. But even as her voice was erased, her influence echoed in strange and powerful ways. Her daughter, Elizabeth, grew up in the shadow of that blade, declared illegitimate, hidden from court, a child born of scandal, surrounded by whispers and warnings. And yet, she remembered her mother, not through stories, those were forbidden, but through the fear that followed her. She grew cautious, calculating. She learned that to survive in a world that had murdered her mother, she could never fully trust anyone, that the crown could offer no protection, that love could be fatal. And so, when Elizabeth became queen decades later, she never married, never gave a man the power to destroy her. Some said she was cold, others said she was brilliant, but all of it traced back to Anne, a mother whose legacy lived not in stories, but in scars. But let's return to the day itself, May 19, 1536. Some reports claim that the moment Anne's head fell, the weather changed, that clouds covered the sun, that a cold wind swept through the crowd, that even the birds went silent. The executioner wiped his blade and stepped back. The priest continued to pray. But no one moved. For a moment, time stopped. Because they hadn't just killed a queen, they had killed a woman who had dared to be more than what they allowed. Anne Boleyn was not meek. She was not quiet. She did not shrink. She questioned. She argued. She challenged men twice her age and rank. She wasn't supposed to rise as high as she did. And once she did, they made sure she'd fall even lower. They called her a witch. They said she had 6 fingers, that she bewitched the king, that her eyes could curse a man. All lies, desperate lies, but the rumors stuck, because powerful women have always been easier to destroy when made monstrous. Her intelligence became arrogance. Her charm became manipulation. Her beauty became a weapon. And so they built her a scaffold instead of a statue. But you don't silence a woman like Anne Boleyn with a blade. You just make her louder. Today, her ghost lives not just in the tower's cold walls, but in every history book that dares to tell the truth, in every story that chooses fact over flattery, in every woman who refuses to be silent. Her voice survived the sword. Her legacy outlived the king who ordered her death. And that, perhaps, is the real horror for Henry, that the woman he tried to erase became immortal. The years that followed Anne Boleyn's execution were steeped in iron and ash. Henry VIII continued his reign with an ever-growing paranoia, as if he feared Anne's ghost would rise from the ground and drag him into the grave beside her. He had gotten what he wanted, a clean slate, a new wife, a path toward the male heir he so desperately craved. But something was different after Anne, colder, sharper, as if the crown itself had been poisoned by the blade he had ordered. Those who remained in Henry's court never spoke her name, not in public, not even in private. It was as if Anne Boleyn had become a curse, an omen of how power could twist into cruelty. But her memory lingered in hidden ways, in quiet glances, in the trembling hands of those who had once dined with her, danced beside her, watched her rise and fall. They remembered the girl with the quick wit, the penetrating eyes, the bold laughter that used to echo through the palace corridors. That laughter had been replaced by silence, the kind of silence you only hear after a scream. The documents from the time were carefully edited. The official records describe her execution as dignified, swift, merciful. But beneath the ink, in the margins of letters and diaries, a different story emerged, that the queen had been betrayed by those closest to her, that her trial had been a sham, that Henry had already been courting Jane Seymour Weil and sat in prison, that her last words were a lie told with trembling smile, a final act of grace offered to a man who showed her none. And yet, even in death, and Boleyn's presence remained impossible to ignore. The tower itself seemed to remember. Year after year, reports came in of sightings. A pale woman walking the grounds in the early morning mist, a figure kneeling at the spot where the scaffold once stood. One story tells of a guard who fainted after seeing a headless woman staring at him through the bars of the gatehouse. He was found the next morning, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a scream. When questioned, he could only repeat one phrase: "She looked at me." Visitors to the tower still speak of her. Some claim to feel watched near the chapel where she lies buried. Others say the air grows colder without explanation. One tourist, decades ago, claimed to hear a woman softly humming a lullaby while alone near Trader's Gate. When she turned, no one was there. But it's not the ghost that haunts us. It's the truth. The truth that Anne Boleyn was not killed because she sinned, but because she threatened the system built to silence women like her. She was too clever, too visible, too unwilling to become the docile figurehead the court expected. She was not just a queen. She was a force, and that terrified the men who surrounded her. So they did what terrified men have always done. They took her voice. They took her body. And they thought it would be enough. But Anne's story refuses to die, because her death was not a private affair. It was staged, performed, meant to send a message. And that message, intended to intimidate, has instead become a warning carved into history's bones, that the crown protects no one from cruelty and that power, once challenged, will spill blood to survive. And so she walks, not just in the tower, but in the minds of every generation who reads between the lines, who sees beyond the portraits and the propaganda, who hears her words echo from the scaffold. "I am come hither to die, and I pray God save the king." Not a curse, not even defiance, a mirror, a final reflection offered from the edge of the blade. The stone that marks Anne Boleyn's grave is small, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, candles, and whispered prayers. Most who visit the chapel of the Tower of London walk past it without noticing. There's no grand statue, no royal crest, no monument carved in marble, just a name, a date, and silence. But under that stone lies more than bone. It holds a story that has outlived empires, a warning dressed in velvet, a voice that was silenced, but never forgotten, because Anne Boleyn was never supposed to survive history. She was meant to vanish, to be remembered only as a lesson, a fallen queen, a cautionary tale. But instead, she became something else entirely. She became legend. Her death was horrifying, her legacy immortal. And perhaps, in the end, that's what scared them most. Because Anne's true execution wasn't just the sword, it was the attempt to erase her, and they failed. Today, her face appears in history books. Her words are studied. Her daughter, Elizabeth, became one of the greatest monarchs in history. The girl who watched the world bury her mother learned to never bow to it. And Boleyn walks still, not in body, but in memory, and in truth, because truth never stays buried. Not here. If this story struck a chord, if you felt the chill of forgotten justice, or the weight of history's darkest whispers, subscribe to the channel, because we bring the shadows into the light. And we're just getting started.